snow moved like a living thing across the empty prairie, whispering along the frozen ground, curling into the hollows between fence posts and drifting over the hard, cracked dirt. The wind was not loud, yet it carried a strange weight, the way a church bell might carry sorrow even when it rang softly. Against one of those fence posts, where the frost had stiffened the wood into something older than it was, a young woman sat bound, her wrists lashed behind her with coarse rope. Her head hung low, strands of black hair clinging to the wind-burnt skin of her cheek. The long mustard-yellow dress she wore was stiff with cold, its hem darkened by days of dust and a night of snow. She had been there long enough for frost to bite at the fabric. At her feet, on a single thin blanket, lay 4 tiny swaddled forms. The newborns whimpered in turns, their cries breaking the stillness with a raw, bird-like fragility. She bent forward when she could, trying to shield them from the wind with her body, though her bound hands made her movements slow and awkward. The town was just far enough away that no sound carried back. Chimney smoke rose in thin columns in the distance, as if the warmth of human life had decided it wanted nothing to do with her. The quiet out here was the kind that made a person feel they had been set aside from the rest of the world, forgotten, left to fade into whatever the snow decided to do with them. Hoofbeats broke the stillness. At first faint, like the memory of a heartbeat, and then closer, clearer, the crunch of snow under weight, the faint jangle of tack. The woman did not look up right away. She had learned that looking too quickly at a man approaching could be taken for invitation, or defiance, or any number of things a man might twist against her. The rider came into view through the falling flurries, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered beneath a dark coat that hung past his knees, hat brim shadowing his face. His horse's breath smoked in the cold, and the lantern hanging from his saddle threw a dim golden circle ahead of him. He slowed as he drew near, the horse shifting against the wind. She lifted her face. The man stopped as if something had struck him in the chest. For a long, long moment, neither moved. The air between them seemed to thicken until it was almost visible. He dismounted without a word, boots sinking into the crusted snow, the lantern's light swaying with each step. The closer he came, the more the years seemed to fold back in on him, erasing winters, blizzards, and empty nights until he stood looking at her not as a stranger in the snow but as the woman he had once called his own. Her lips parted, and for an instant it looked like she might cry. But the voice that came out was rough, broken by cold. "Please, don't open it." The words were strange in the quiet, not a plea for rescue but for restraint. He followed her gaze and saw a small wooden box tied to the post above her shoulder, its edges worn, its surface scuffed by weather. It was no larger than his hand, but it was bound to the post with its own thin cord, separate from the rope that held her. He could not guess why such a thing would matter more to her than the freezing rope biting her wrist. He stepped closer, the snow shifting under his weight. The babies made small noises, those newborn, searching sounds that seemed too delicate to last in such a world. He dropped to one knee, his gloved fingers brushing the rough cord at her wrist. The rope was frozen stiff in places. His gaze moved over her face. Thinner now, the softness sharpened by survival, the eyes shadowed but still holding the same deep color he remembered. He had not seen her in years. Not since the day the river rose and took the crossing, separating their wagon from his. Weeks of searching had turned to months, then the hard truth had settled. She was gone. He had buried her in his mind, built a life on the ashes of what they'd been. Yet here she was, tied to a fence in the snow with 4 children he didn't know. Her voice came again, quieter, as though she feared the wind might carry it to the wrong ears. "They'll be back." The words had no explanation wrapped around them, but he heard the warning in them. Whoever had left her here intended to return. He looked toward the horizon, scanning the pale sweep of land. Nothing moved there except the slow, patient march of snow toward night. His fingers tightened around the rope at her wrists, then stopped. If he cut her free now, what then? The men who had done this would come looking. This wasn't just cruelty. It was a message, and men who sent such messages did not forgive those who erased them. The wind shifted, bringing the faintest rattle from the little wooden box above her shoulder. He almost reached for it, but her eyes caught his, sharp despite the cold, and he let his hand fall. They stayed like that for a long moment, the cold biting deeper, the weight of years unspoken pressing between them. Finally, he rose, stepping back toward his horse. He told himself he needed time to think, to plan, to make sure he could take her and the babies somewhere they wouldn't be hunted. Yet with each step away, the air seemed thinner, harder to breathe. He mounted, lantern swinging, the snow already trying to cover the prints he'd made. Behind him, her voice followed, softer now, almost carried away by the wind. They'll be back before night. He rode on, but the image of her bound to that fence, the 4 small lives curled at her feet, and the unopened box tied beside her burned into him like the slow heat of an ember that refuses to die. The sound of the rope creaking in the wind stayed in his ears long after the town lights swallowed him from the prairie. He did not sleep that night. The lantern on his kitchen table burned low, its light winnowing across the worn boards, painting the walls with restless shadows. The snow outside pressed against the windows like a stranger listening at the glass. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he kept his hands around the cup as if its warmth might return if he waited long enough. She was there in every corner of his mind, her face lifted against the wind, the raw line of rope biting her wrists, the sound of her voice asking him not to open that small wooden box. Years had passed since he had last touched her hand, years since the river crossing and the loss that had hollowed him out. He had carried her absence like a stone in his chest, heavy but unmoving. Now it shifted, sharp-edged and urgent. In the quiet hours before dawn, fragments of the years between rose in him like ghosts. How he had searched after the river took her. How each trail had gone cold. How he'd come to believe she had not survived the winter that followed. He had told himself it was mercy not to picture her suffering. Yet now he knew she had lived through worse than he had ever imagined. By morning, the storm had eased. The streets of town were half buried in drifts, the wind sweeping their edges into strange, sculpted shapes. He walked into the general store, his coat still dusted with snow, and found Eli behind the counter weighing out nails for a rancher. Eli's eyes flicked up in that way of men who see more than they will admit. "You were out late last night," Eli said, the words carrying the weight of a question without its shape. "I was," he answered and left it there. From the back, Mrs. Kellen appeared, wrapped in her old shawl, her sharp eyes narrowing as she looked at him. "You saw her, didn't you?" He did not ask how she knew. In a town like this, cruelty was not invisible. It only stayed unspoken because speaking could cost you. Mrs. Kellen leaned against the counter. Her husband's kin left her out there yesterday morning. Said she shamed them. For what? The question was low, but the edge in it made Eli glance toward the door, as if to make sure they were alone. "For bringing girls into the world instead of a boy," she said flatly. "For at once, too. As if she chose it." She shook her head. "They've been looking for a reason to cast her aside. Now they've got it." He felt the words settle in him like iron, heavy and cold. He wanted to ask why no one had untied her, but he already knew the answer. The men who left her there were the kind that made examples, and examples were meant to be feared. He left the store with blankets, milk for the babies, and a flask of strong spirits that might warm her through the night. The snow crunched under his boots as he crossed to the livery, the sky a hard pale blue above. As he saddled his horse, his mind turned over what little he knew of her years away from him. He could see the shape of it now, in pieces. Taken in by a family who wanted her for her youth, worked hard in their household, measured only by what she could bear them. When the children came and all were girls, the verdict had been swift. The fence post, the rope, the cold. A warning to others that a woman's worth could be tied in knots and left to freeze. By midday he was riding back toward the stretch of prairie where he had found her. The wind had shifted east, driving the cold across the open ground, and the sun did little but glare against the snow. When he came in sight of the fence, she was still there. The babies lay close under his coat, which she had draped over them the night before. Her eyes lifted when she heard the horse, but she did not smile. He could see the fatigue pulling at her features, the color drained from her lip. "You came back," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'm not leaving you here," he replied, dismounting. He set the blankets over her lap, fed the babies one by one, then poured a measure of the spirits into the cap and held it to her lip. The heat made her flinch, then close her eyes for a moment, as if the taste carried her somewhere far from here. "Why didn't you let me open the box?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Not here. Not where they might see." Her gaze moved toward the horizon, where the faintest dust of movement might have been nothing, or might have been the promise of riders. "It's all I have left from before." The cold pressed close around them. He wanted to cut her free right then, to throw her onto the saddle and ride until the snow and the past were both behind them. But the part of him that had lived through the harsh laws of this land knew what it would mean to take her without care. The men who left her here would not stop at words if they wanted her back, or wanted her gone for good. He worked at the knots with careful fingers, loosening them enough to ease her pain but not enough to make it clear she could walk away. "They'll come before long," she murmured, her eyes on the snow. "Then I'll be here," he said. He stayed until the sky began to turn that bruised purple that comes before nightfall. The wind had teeth again, sharper now, biting at the edges of their shelter. As he rose to go, she looked up at him, her eyes carrying the same question they had on the day they were parted. "Will you find me again?" "I'll be back," he promised. He rode into the gathering dark, the horizon swallowing the fence post and her small, stubborn figure, the babies hidden under layers against the cold. He did not look back, but every step of the horse carried the weight of what would come when those other riders returned. And he knew that before the next storm broke, he would have to choose between safety and the kind of risk that could change everything. The storm came in low and fast from the north, a wall of white that blurred the line between sky and earth. By the time he left town with the supplies, the first fine threads of snow were already falling, twisting in the wind like they were in no hurry, knowing the worst was behind them. His horse's breath plumed into the air, and every hoof-step sank into powder that deepened as he rode. He had no need to look at the road, the land was etched into his memory from years of riding it. Still, his mind turned over each sound behind him, half expecting to hear more than the wind. There had been talk in the saloon that morning, voices lowered but not low enough, about the men who would return for her. The tone had been casual, almost bored, as though she were a calf straying from a pen, not a woman with 4 newborns clinging to life in the snow. When he reached the fence line, the world felt smaller, the snow muting all sound but the hiss of the wind. She was there as he had left her, though the drift at her side had grown higher. His coat still covered the babies, the blanket beneath stiffened by frost. She looked up when she heard him, but her expression did not change, as though she had been guarding her face against hope itself. He tied the horse close, brought the bundles of food, the blankets, the milk. Without speaking, he knelt and began wrapping the babies in the heavier wool, one at a time, warming their small feet with his hands before tucking them close again. She watched in silence, her breath coming in small, uneven clouds. "You shouldn't be here," she said finally, her voice raw. "Neither should you." Her eyes lowered to the rope at her wrist. He began working at the knots again, his gloves off now despite the cold. The fibers were stiff with ice, and each twist felt like trying to undo a promise made by someone who wanted it to hold forever. When the last knot loosened enough for her to shift her arms, she didn't move right away. She flexed her fingers slowly, wincing as the blood began to return. He poured a little milk into a tin cup for the babies, tilting it carefully to each tiny mouth. She tried to help, but her hands shook, and he steadied them with his own. "You look different," she said after a long pause. "Years will do that. I thought you were gone. I thought the same of you." His voice was quiet, but there was an edge beneath it that neither of them missed. The wind picked up, driving snow in sharp lines across the ground. He shifted so his body blocked the worst of it from her and the children. They stayed like that for a while, close enough that the warmth between them was the only warmth that mattered. She glanced toward the small wooden box still tied to the post. "You still want to open it?" He shook his head. "Not if it matters to you." Her lips pressed together, as if that answer hurt in some way she couldn't name. "It's all I had left of you. After the river took you. I kept it hidden. When they found it, I thought they'd burn it. Instead they tied it there, like it was part of my punishment." He studied the box, then her. "Then it stays closed until you want it opened." A faint, tired smile touched her mouth, there and gone. The light was dimming fast now, the storm thickening until the air itself seemed solid. He could feel the weight of what was coming, the cold, the riders, the choice he would have to make before morning. "They won't be long," she murmured, eyes on the darkening horizon. "Then we make ready," he said. He layered the blankets around her and the children, tucked the milk into his coat to keep it from freezing, and set the lantern low to shield its glow. The snow was falling harder now, rattling against the fence and blurring the distance into nothing. He could feel the way the storm would hide them from some dangers and draw others near. In the dim light, her gaze found his again, steady despite the cold. "I didn't think I'd see kindness again." "You will," he said. For a moment the wind dropped, and the quiet between them was deep enough to hear the faint breathing of the babies beneath the blankets. Then, from far off, a light, small but moving, broke against the darkness. One light, then another, flickering in the white haze. "Riders." He shifted to his feet, the snow stinging his face, his hand brushing the grip of his revolver though it stayed holstered. "This time," he said, looking down at her, "I'm not losing you." The last rope slid free from her wrist. The wind rose again, carrying the sound of hoofbeats closer. The lights drew nearer until shapes emerged from the swirling snow, 3 riders, their outlines sharp against the white, their horses moving with the slow certainty of men who believed no one would dare stand in their way. The lead man wore a thick coat the color of soot, his hat pulled low, scarf drawn up to his eyes. Even through the wind's hiss, the sound of leather creaking and hoofbeats thudding carried clear. He stepped in front of her, the lantern low at his side, his body between her and the approaching shadows. The babies stirred under the blankets, their small cries nearly lost in the wind. She tightened her hold on them, her back against the post now not from the rope but from instinct. The riders reined in a dozen yards away. The one in front leaned forward in his saddle, snow catching in his beard. "Step aside," he called, his voice carrying in the cold. "She's ours to take." "She's my wife," he said, each word slow, heavy enough to stand in the air between them. The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "She's another man's now. And he's done with her." His gaze shifted to the bundle at her feet. All that trouble and not a son among them. A waste. The anger that rose in him was quiet and precise, like a blade being drawn. He didn't reach for his revolver, though his hand was near enough. "You left her to die in the snow with your bloodkin's children. That's not a thing I forgive." The second rider, younger, shifted in his saddle. "We'll forgive you for walking away. Just this once." He stepped closer, boots sinking into the drift. "Not happening." The leader's eyes narrowed, the snow whipping between them. "Then I'll take her over your body." Before the man could dismount, she moved. Slowly, with the care of someone protecting more than her own life, she rose from where she'd been crouched and held out the small wooden box. The rope that had tied it to the post now dangled loose in her hand. Her fingers were stiff, but her voice carried, clear and steady despite the wind. "This decides it." The leader snorted. "What's in that?" She stepped past him to stand in the lantern's glow, the snow clinging to her hair and lashes. "Proof," she said. Her thumb worked at the clasp, the lid creaking open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a gold wedding band and a small bundle of letters. The band caught the lantern light, and in that moment the years between seemed to vanish. "These are his," she said, nodding toward the man beside her. from before the river took him from me. We were married long before your family claimed me. You have no right." The younger rider's gaze flicked to the leader. "If that's true—" "It is," he cut in, his voice leaving no space for doubt. "And I'll stand witness." From behind, the crunch of wagon wheels broke through the standoff. Mrs. Kellen's team came into view, the older woman sitting straight despite the wind, Eli beside her with his rifle resting across his knees. They had come quietly, unseen until now, but their presence changed the air. This was no longer an unseen cruelty in the snow. There were eyes on it now, and those eyes would remember. The leader's face hardened. He looked at the box again, then at the wagon, then at the man still standing between him and the woman. "Keep her," he spat. "She'll ruin you like she ruined us." "She's not ruined," came the quiet reply. For a long moment, the leader didn't move. Then he pulled his horse around sharply, snow spraying from the hooves, and rode back into the storm, the other two following without a word. Their lantern lights dwindled, swallowed by the night. The wind eased, as if the storm itself had been holding its breath. He turned to her, the lantern's glow catching the faint tremor in her hands as she closed the box. Without speaking, he took it from her and slipped it into his coat, the weight of it warm against him. Mrs. Kellen called down from the wagon. "We'd better move before this road closes for good." He lifted the babies into the wagon one at a time, wrapping them in the thick quilts Mrs. Kellen had brought. Then he helped her up, his hands lingering at her waist just long enough for her to know she was steady now. She looked at him as he climbed in after her. "Thank you for opening it." He met her gaze. "Some things are meant to be opened. Some are meant to be kept." This was both. The wagon jolted forward, the snow crunching under the wheels, the storm closing in behind them like a curtain. In the distance, the horizon blurred into nothing but the small warmth of the wagon held. Sometimes, the thing we fear to open is the only door home will ever use. And on nights like this, when the snow falls heavy and the world forgets itself, there are still those who will stand in its path, refusing to let it take what little light remains.